The bar was loud, smoky, and alive with dangerous whispers when Mary finally decided she had no choice left. The place was called the Black Lantern, a dim underground bar tucked beneath a narrow street where rainwater dripped through rusted pipes and the air always smelled like old whiskey and burned tobacco. It was not a place for ordinary people. Men in expensive suits leaned over dark wooden tables, speaking in quiet tones about shipments, territories, and problems that usually ended in blood. Every chair in the room belonged to someone powerful in the underworld. Mary had worked there for 10 years, quietly cleaning glasses and wiping tables, pretending she did not hear the conversations around her. Tonight, however, her hands trembled so badly that the glasses rattled against the counter. She kept glancing toward the door, her heart beating faster each time footsteps echoed down the staircase. Because tonight was the deadline. The loan sharks had given her daughter until midnight. If the money wasn't paid, they promised something worse than death. And the man leading them was someone far more dangerous than ordinary debt collectors. Arnold Pusswell, the reckless heir of the Pusswell Mafia family, had taken a cruel interest in Mary's daughter Martha. Outside, thunder rolled across the sky like distant gunfire. Mary wiped her hands on her apron and looked toward the back corner of the bar, where a tall man had just walked in. The room subtly changed when he entered. Conversations lowered, eyes turned away, because Marcus Santiago had arrived. Marcus Santiago stepped into the dim light like a shadow made of steel. He was in his early 30s, tall, she broad-shouldered, wearing a dark coat that looked expensive without trying to be. A thin tattoo curved up the side of his neck like black smoke, disappearing beneath his collar. It was the mark people whispered about in the underworld, the sign of a man who had built power from blood and survival. When he walked through the bar, even the loudest criminals became quiet. Marcus did not shout, he did not threaten, but everyone knew what he was capable of. He sat at his usual table in the far corner, where he could see every entrance, every window, every nervous movement. A glass of whiskey appeared in front of him before he even asked. Mary placed it there with shaking hands. Marcus noticed immediately. His dark eyes lifted from the glass and studied her face. "You're shaking," he said quietly. His voice was calm, but it carried weight. Mary forced a weak smile and tried to step away, but Marcus gently placed a hand on the counter. "Mary," he said again, softer now. "What's wrong?" For 10 years, she had served drinks to monsters and killers without fear. But standing in front of Marcus Santiago tonight, the one man she trusted most, her courage nearly broke. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words caught in her throat. Fear wrapped around her chest, like cold iron. Okay guys, before we continue, if this story already has your attention, take a second to support the channel. Hit the like button, subscribe if you're new here, and drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I always love seeing how far these stories travel. Now, let's get back to what happened that night in the Black Lantern. Mary leaned closer to Marcus so the other men in the bar wouldn't hear. Her voice trembled like dry leaves in the wind. "Marcus, I need your help." Those words alone were enough to make him sit straighter. Mary had never asked him for anything before, not once in all the years they had known each other. Marcus remembered her from long before the bar existed in his life. When he was a boy living in his father's guarded mansion, Mary had been the quiet caretaker who bandaged his scraped knees and brought him warm food when the house felt empty. His mother had died giving birth to him, and his father was too busy ruling his empire to notice the loneliness of a child growing up in marble halls. Mary had been the closest thing to kindness he knew back then. After his father was assassinated when Marcus was 14, the world turned violent and cold. But somehow, Mary remained one of the few warm memories that survived. Years later, he tracked her down at this bar, just to make sure she was still safe. And since then, whenever Marcus came here, he spoke to her like an old friend rather than a crime boss. Now she stood before him with tears in her eyes. "It's my daughter," Mary whispered. "Martha." Marcus had heard that name many times. Mary talked about her often. The smart girl with bright eyes and dreams bigger than the city streets. But Marcus had always avoided meeting her. A man like him brought danger everywhere he went. Mary swallowed hard before continuing. My husband, before he died, he borrowed money from the wrong people. Her hands gripped the counter as if the wood might keep her standing. Loan sharks. The interest kept growing and growing. I tried paying it little by little, but they don't care anymore. Marcus's jaw tightened slightly. He already knew where this story was going, but he let her speak. 3 days ago, Mary said, her voice breaking, Arnold Pusswell came to our apartment. That name caused a small shift in Marcus's expression. Arnold was known across the underworld as a spoiled predator, the kind of man who hid behind his powerful family name while causing chaos wherever he went. He said if we couldn't pay the debt tonight, Mary whispered, then Martha would have to repay it another way. The words felt dirty even leaving her mouth. Marcus's fingers slowly curled around his glass. The ice inside cracked softly. Mary wiped tears from her cheeks, embarrassed to cry in front of him. Marcus, I'm not asking you for money, she said quickly. I know what kind of world you live in. I know your enemies. She took a shaky breath. But today is the deadline. Arnold's men are watching our building. If Martha walks outside alone, they'll take her. Mary finally looked straight into his eyes, desperation burning in her gaze. Please, she whispered, escort my daughter just for today. Keep her safe until this passes. Marcus Santiago did not answer right away. The bar around them buzzed with quiet conversations and clinking glasses, but the moment felt strangely silent. He stared at the amber liquid in his whiskey glass as if it held memories buried deep inside him. A woman's laugh echoed faintly in his mind, the voice of someone he once trusted more than anyone else. Years ago, the woman he loved had betrayed him to his enemies. That betrayal nearly cost him his life and hardened his heart forever. Since that day, Marcus had built walls around himself so thick that no one could enter, especially not another woman who might one day destroy him again. That was why he had always avoided meeting Martha, even when Mary talked about her with pride. Protecting someone meant caring about them, and caring always led to pain. But now Mary stood before him like a desperate mother cornered by wolves. Marcus slowly looked up. Where is she now? He asked quietly. Relief flickered across Mary's face like the first light of sunrise. At home, she said. I told her to stay inside and lock the door. Marcus nodded slowly, already thinking through the situation. So Arnold Pusswell causing trouble on his territory was dangerous enough, but threatening Mary's daughter crossed a line Marcus did not like. He pushed his chair back and stood up. The men in the bar watched silently as the powerful Mafia boss placed a few bills on the table and put on his coat. Let's go, Marcus said. Mary blinked in surprise. Now, he replied. But neither of them knew that somewhere across the city, Arnold Pusswell was already smiling, because Martha had just been taken. Rain fell softly against the narrow windows of Mary's small apartment building as the story truly began days earlier. The building stood on a tired street, where broken streetlights flickered like dying fireflies and stray cats searched through trash bags for food. Inside the tiny second-floor apartment, Martha sat at the small kitchen table with a notebook open in front of her. She was 22, with calm brown eyes and long dark hair tied in a loose braid. A single lamp lit the room with a warm yellow glow. Martha was writing numbers carefully, crossing them out, writing them again. The numbers never worked. Every time she added them up, the result was the same impossible answer. The debt her father had left behind was growing like a monster that refused to stop eating. Her father had once owned a small delivery business, but when sickness came suddenly and hospital bills piled up, he borrowed money from men who smiled too easily and asked too few questions. At first the payments were manageable, Then the interest began growing, twisting into something ugly and uncontrollable. After her father died, the debt collectors did not care about grief or fairness. They only cared about numbers. Martha rubbed her tired eyes and looked toward the bedroom where her mother slept after another long night shift at the Black Lantern. Mary worked harder than anyone she knew, but even that could not stop the growing storm hanging over their heads. Outside, thunder rolled softly across the sky, like a warning that something terrible was slowly approaching. The first time Arnold Pusswell came to the apartment, Martha knew immediately that he was not like the other collectors. The knock on the door was calm, polite even. But the moment she opened it, the air seemed to grow colder. Arnold stood in the hallway wearing an expensive gray suit that looked too clean for a place like this. He was 26, tall and handsome in a way that felt sharp and dangerous. His blonde hair was slicked back neatly, and a thin smile rested on his face as if the world was a joke only he understood. Behind him stood two large men with blank expressions. "Miss Martha," Arnold said in a voice smooth as silk, "I believe we need to talk about your father's debt." Martha's fingers tightened around the door handle. "My mother is working," she replied carefully. Arnold tilted his head slightly, pretending to consider that. "Yes, the bartender at the Black Lantern," he said casually, as if he already knew everything about them. "Hard-working woman, loyal too." His eyes drifted slowly across the apartment behind her. The old couch, the small table, the peeling paint on the walls. "It's a shame when good people owe money they cannot repay." Martha felt her chest tighten. "We're trying," she said quietly. Arnold smiled again, but this time the kindness disappeared from his eyes. "Trying," he repeated softly. "Unfortunately, my family does not accept trying as a form of payment." The two men behind him chuckled quietly. Arnold stepped closer, resting one hand against the doorframe as if he owned the building. "Your father borrowed $40,000, he said. "With interest, the total has reached $120,000. Martha's breath caught in her throat. That number felt impossible. "We can't pay that," she whispered before she could stop herself. Arnold's smile widened slightly. "I know." His gaze slowly traveled across her face, lingering in a way that made her skin crawl. "But debts can be paid in other ways." The words hung in the air like poison. Martha's stomach twisted with sudden fear. She understood exactly what he meant. Arnold leaned a little closer, lowering his voice. "I'll be generous," he said. "You have 3 days." Martha stared at him in silence. "If the money is paid, wonderful," Arnold continued calmly. "If not, well, perhaps you and I can come to a different arrangement." One of the large men behind him laughed again, low and unpleasant. Martha forced her voice to stay steady. "Leave," she said. Arnold's eyebrow lifted slightly in amusement. "Such spirit," he said. "I like that." He stepped back from the door and adjusted his jacket. 3 days, Martha." Then he turned and walked down the hallway with his men following behind him. Martha closed the door slowly and locked it with shaking hands. Only then did her legs feel weak enough that she had to sit down. For a long time she stared at the door, listening to the quiet hallway outside. Something told her that the nightmare had only just begun. Mary found out the truth the following evening. Martha tried hiding it at first, but fear has a way of showing itself in small things. The way Martha kept checking the window, the way she jumped whenever footsteps echoed in the hallway. When Mary finally forced the story out of her, she felt the world collapse around her shoulders. "Arnold Pusswell?" she whispered, horrified. The name alone carried weight in the underworld. The Pusswell family controlled large sections of the city's illegal trade, and Arnold was known as their most reckless heir. "We can go to the police," Martha suggested weakly. But Mary shook her head immediately. "The police won't help us," she said. "Men like Arnold have friends everywhere." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Rain tapped against the window while the small apartment felt suddenly smaller than ever. Mary sat down beside her daughter and held her hands. "Listen to me," she said gently. "No matter what happens, you will not face that man alone." Martha tried to smile, but fear lingered in her eyes. "What are we going to do?" she asked quietly. Mary didn't answer right away. Instead, her thoughts drifted toward the Black Lantern bar and a man who sat at the same corner table almost every night. A man who ruled his world with quiet authority. Marcus Santiago. Mary had known him since he was a lonely boy in a mansion filled with silence. But asking him for help meant pulling him into something personal, something dangerous. For 10 years, she had avoided that choice. Now the choice might no longer belong to her. The second day passed like a slow nightmare. Every sound outside the apartment made Martha's heart race. Sometimes she saw unfamiliar cars parked on the street below, engines running quietly. Once she noticed 2 men standing near the entrance pretending to smoke cigarettes while watching the building. They never tried entering, but their presence was enough to send a cold chill down her spine. Arnold was waiting, playing with them, enjoying the fear. By the 3rd day, Mary knew the truth she had been trying to avoid. There was no way they could gather that kind of money. The debt had grown too large. The system was designed that way. Loan sharks didn't expect repayment. They expected control. That evening, before leaving for work, Mary hugged her daughter tightly at the door. "Lock everything," she said. "Don't open the door for anyone." Martha nodded. "I will." Mary hesitated before stepping into the hallway. Something in her chest felt heavy, like a warning she could not explain, but she forced herself to walk toward the stairway anyway, because she had already made her decision. Tonight she would ask Marcus Santiago for help. She would swallow her pride and beg if necessary, because a mother could endure humiliation, fear, and shame. But she would never stand still while wolves circled her child. What Mary didn't know was that far across the city, Arnold Pusswell had already grown impatient. And impatience, for a man like Arnold, usually ended in violence. Marcus Santiago's black car cut through the wet city streets like a blade through dark water. Rain slid across the windshield in long silver lines, while the engine hummed with quiet power. Mary sat in the passenger seat, gripping her purse so tightly that her fingers had turned pale. Marcus drove with steady focus, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. The city lights reflected across his face, briefly revealing the tattoo curling along his neck like dark smoke. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The silence inside the car felt heavy with unspoken fears. Marcus finally broke it. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" His voice wasn't angry. It was calm, but firm. Mary looked down at her hands. "Because I know the world you live in," she said quietly. "I didn't want to drag you into something small like this." Marcus let out a short breath. Arnold Pusswell threatening someone I care about isn't small." The words surprised Mary. She slowly turned to look at him. Marcus rarely spoke about caring for anyone. Years of betrayal had turned him into a man who trusted almost no one. The woman he once loved had sold his secrets to enemies who tried to kill him. Since that day, Marcus had built his life around control and distance. Emotions were dangerous. They created weaknesses that enemies could exploit. That was why he had always avoided meeting Martha. Mary talked about her daughter often. A kind girl, smart, hard-working, someone who deserved a peaceful life. Marcus had never wanted someone like that to see what he had become. The car turned onto a quieter street lined with old apartment buildings. Marcus slowed slightly. "Which building?" he asked. Mary pointed ahead with a shaking hand. "The one with the broken light above the entrance." Marcus nodded and pulled the car to the side of the road. The building looked tired and worn, its paint fading beneath years of rain and sun. The street was quiet, but Marcus noticed small details immediately. A dark sedan parked across the road, 2 men standing near a convenience store pretending to talk while occasionally glancing toward the apartment entrance. His eyes narrowed slightly. "Stay in the car," he said calmly. Mary turned to him quickly. "Marcus, please don't start a fight." He opened the door slowly, the rain instantly touching his coat. "I'm not here to start anything," he replied. "I'm here to end something." Mary watched nervously as he stepped onto the sidewalk. Marcus walked toward the apartment entrance with the quiet confidence of someone who feared nothing in this world. The two men across the street noticed him almost immediately. One of them whispered something to the other, and both straightened slightly. Marcus didn't even look at them, but somehow his presence alone made them uncomfortable. He reached the entrance door and pressed the buzzer for Martha's apartment. Inside, footsteps moved quickly across the floor. A moment later, a soft voice came through the speaker. "Yes?" Marcus paused for half a second. For the first time, he was about to meet the girl Mary had spoken about for years. Martha opened the apartment door slowly, expecting to see her mother. Instead, a tall stranger stood in the hallway outside. The first thing she noticed was the tattoo along his neck. The second thing was his eyes. Calm, observant. The kind of eyes that missed nothing. Marcus studied her quietly for a moment. She looked younger than he expected, though there was strength behind her nervous expression. "You must be Martha," he said. His voice was deep but steady. Martha hesitated before nodding. "Yes. Who are you?" Before Marcus could answer, Mary hurried up the stairway behind him. "Sweetheart," she called. Martha's face lit up with relief. "Mom!" She stepped forward and hugged her tightly. Marcus remained near the door, watching silently as the two reunited. Mary pulled back and gently held Martha's face. "Are you all right? Did anyone come here?" Martha shook her head. "No, but there were men watching the building earlier." Mary nodded grimly. Then she turned slightly toward Marcus. "Martha, this is Marcus Santiago." The name landed in the small hallway like a sudden thunderclap. Martha's eyes widened slightly. Even someone outside the Underworld had heard that name whispered in the city. She looked back at him with surprise and confusion. "You're... him?" Marcus gave a small nod. Martha wasn't sure what she expected from a Mafia boss. Perhaps someone older or louder. But Marcus Santiago stood quietly with his hands in his coat pockets, looking more like a calm storm than a man. "Your mother asked me to escort you somewhere tonight," he said simply. Inside the apartment, Marcus quickly noticed how small the place was. The furniture was simple but clean. A few framed photos sat on a shelf near the window. One picture showed Martha as a young girl sitting on her father's shoulders at a beach somewhere bright and happy. Marcus glanced at it for a moment before looking away. Mary nervously explained the situation again while Martha listened quietly. "Arnold Pusswell gave us until midnight," Mary finished softly. Marcus checked his watch. "Then we shouldn't waste time." Martha looked between them. "Wait. Escort me where?" Marcus met her eyes calmly. "Somewhere Arnold can't reach you." Martha hesitated. The idea of leaving with a Mafia boss she had just met felt strange, almost unreal. But when she looked at her mother's worried face, the choice became simple. "Okay," she said quietly. Mary helped her gather a few things into a small bag while Marcus stood near the window. He watched the street below carefully. The same dark sedan was still parked outside. One of the men pretended to scroll on his phone while glancing up at the building. Marcus recognized the posture immediately. Surveillance. Arnold's men were waiting, but Marcus wasn't worried. If anything, his eyes held a faint spark of something colder. When Martha finished packing, she stepped beside her mother again. Mary held her tightly. "Everything will be all right," she whispered, though she sounded unsure. Marcus moved toward the door. "Let's go." They walked down the stairway together, the dim hallway lights flickering above them. As they stepped outside into the cool night air, Marcus felt the subtle shift in the street. The two men across the road straightened slightly, pretending not to watch. Martha noticed them too. "Those are the men," she whispered. Marcus didn't look at them directly. Instead, he calmly opened the car door for Martha. "Get in," he said. She obeyed quickly, while Mary slid into the back seat. Marcus walked around to the driver's side. As he opened his door, one of the men across the street lifted a phone to his ear. Marcus caught the movement from the corner of his eye. Someone was being informed. Somewhere across the city, Arnold Pusswell would soon hear that Martha was leaving the apartment. Marcus started the engine smoothly. The car pulled away from the curb and disappeared down the dark street. For a moment, it looked like everything might be all right. But several blocks away, a black SUV slowly turned on its headlights and began following them. And inside that SUV sat Arnold Pusswell himself. Rain continued falling as Marcus Santiago's car moved through the sleeping city. Streetlights reflected on the wet road like long golden rivers, and the quiet hum of the engine filled the silence inside the vehicle. Martha sat in the passenger seat, holding her small bag on her lap. Mary sat behind her, watching the dark streets pass by with nervous eyes. For the first few minutes, no one spoke. Marcus kept his attention on the road, his hands steady on the steering wheel, but his mind was working quickly, reading the street the same way a hunter reads tracks in the dirt. Cars, shadows, reflections in mirrors. He had survived in the underworld this long because he noticed things other people missed. After 2 turns and a quiet stretch of road, he saw it. A pair of headlights appeared in the distance behind them. At first, it looked like any other vehicle traveling through the rain, but when Marcus slowed slightly, the car behind them slowed too. When he changed lanes, the car followed smoothly. His eyes narrowed just a little. "Stay calm," he said quietly. Martha turned toward him. "Why?" Marcus didn't answer immediately. Instead, he made another turn onto a narrower road lined with warehouses and closed shops. The headlights followed again. Mary leaned forward from the back seat. "Marcus," she whispered nervously. Marcus finally spoke, his voice calm but firm. "We're being followed." The words sent a cold wave through the car. Martha instinctively looked back through the rear window, but Marcus gently stopped her. "Don't stare," he said. "Just sit normally." Martha faced forward again, her heart beating fast against her ribs. The black SUV behind them moved closer, its headlights glowing brighter in the rain. Inside that vehicle sat Arnold Pusswell with one arm resting casually on the door. His expensive watch glimmered under the dim dashboard light. 2 large men sat in the front seats while another sat beside him in the back. Arnold watched Marcus's car ahead of them with quiet amusement. "So that's Marcus Santiago," he said softly. One of the men glanced at him in the rearview mirror. "Boss, should we stop them now?" Arnold shook his head slowly. "No," he replied. "Let's enjoy the game a little longer." His eyes glimmered with cruel excitement. Arnold had heard stories about Marcus for years. The young king of the Santiago organization, a man who had built his empire through intelligence and ruthless discipline. Arnold hated men like that, men who earned power instead of inheriting it. Arnold had grown up surrounded by wealth and protection, and boredom had become his worst enemy. Causing trouble was his favorite cure. And right now, chasing the daughter of a bartender protected by Marcus Santiago felt like a very entertaining game. "Move closer," Arnold ordered quietly. The driver pressed the accelerator slightly. The SUV closed the distance between them like a shark gliding through dark water. Marcus noticed the movement immediately. His fingers tightened slightly on the steering wheel, but his face remained calm. "They're getting impatient," he said quietly. Martha's voice trembled slightly. "What are we going to do?" Marcus glanced toward a narrow road ahead that curved behind several old warehouses. He knew this area well. Many years ago, before he rose to power, he had hidden in places like this while enemies hunted him. Tonight, those same streets would become his advantage. "We're going to take a short detour," he said. Mary's voice shook with worry. "Marcus, please be careful." Marcus gave a small nod. "Always." He suddenly turned the wheel, guiding the car down the narrow warehouse road. The tires splashed through shallow puddles while tall metal buildings rose on both sides like dark walls. The SUV behind them followed without hesitation. Inside it, Arnold leaned forward slightly with a grin. "Now, this is interesting," he murmured. The road ahead split into two directions. Without slowing, Marcus turned sharply left. The SUV followed seconds later. For a moment, the two vehicles raced through the empty industrial street with only the rain and engine sounds filling the night. Then Marcus slowed suddenly and pulled the car beside an abandoned loading dock. "Stay inside," he told Martha and Mary calmly. Before either of them could protest, he stepped out into the rain. Arnold's SUV stopped several yards away. The door opened and Arnold stepped out slowly, adjusting his jacket as rain touched his hair. He looked around the empty warehouse street with a relaxed smile. "Marcus Santiago," he called casually. "I was wondering when we would meet properly." Marcus stood beside his car with his hands in his coat pockets, watching Arnold with quiet focus. The two large bodyguards from the SUV stepped out behind Arnold, their eyes cold and alert. Marcus glanced briefly at them before returning his gaze to Arnold. "You've been causing problems on my streets," Marcus said calmly. Arnold laughed softly. "Your streets? I don't remember the city belonging to you." He walked a few steps closer, the rain tapping gently against the pavement. "But let's not pretend this is about territory," Arnold continued. His eyes drifted toward Marcus's car where Martha sat inside. "I came for the girl." Martha's stomach twisted when she realized he could see her through the window. Marcus shifted slightly, blocking Arnold's view. "You gave her 3 days," Marcus said. "The time isn't over." Arnold shrugged lightly. "True, but patience has never been my strength." His smile widened slightly. "And besides, I was curious to see if the great Marcus Santiago would actually involve himself in something so small." Marcus's expression did not change, but something cold flashed briefly in his eyes. "You should leave," he said quietly. Arnold tilted his head. "Or what?" The rain grew heavier, tapping against metal walls and car roofs. For several long seconds, the two men simply stared at each other, one built by survival and discipline, the other raised in privilege and cruelty. Arnold finally sighed dramatically. "Relax, Marcus. I'm not here for a war tonight." He gestured casually toward the car again. "I only want what my family is owed." Marcus's voice remained calm. "The debt is between you and the father who died." Arnold chuckled. "Unfortunately, debt doesn't die with the man who created it." He stepped closer until he stood only a few feet away. "Here's a better idea," Arnold said softly. "Give me the girl, and we'll pretend none of this happened." The words hung in the cold air like poison. Inside the car, Martha's hands trembled slightly while Mary clutched the seat in silent fear. Marcus slowly removed his hands from his coat pockets. The rain slid down his hair and coat, but he didn't move away. His voice dropped lower, colder. "You're not touching her." Arnold stared at him for a moment, then burst into laughter. "You're serious," he said with amusement. "All this for a bartender's daughter?" He shook his head slowly. Marcus, you're more sentimental than people say." His smile faded slightly as his eyes hardened. "But you've made a mistake." He turned back toward his SUV and snapped his fingers once. Suddenly, more car doors opened in the darkness behind the warehouses. Several armed men stepped out from the shadows. Arnold glanced back at Marcus with quiet satisfaction. "Because I didn't come alone." And inside Marcus's car, Martha suddenly realized something terrifying. The moment Marcus stepped out to face Arnold, the door beside her had quietly unlocked. The rain had grown heavier, turning the warehouse road into a slick mirror of gray water and flashing lights. Martha's heart pounded as she noticed the small red lock on the car door slide upward with a quiet click. For a moment she thought it was a mistake. Maybe Marcus had unlocked the doors before stepping out, but something about the timing felt wrong. Too perfect. Too sudden. Mary noticed it too. "Don't open it," she whispered quickly, gripping Martha's arm. Outside the car, Marcus stood facing Arnold and the growing number of men emerging from the shadows between the warehouses. The situation had changed in seconds. What started as a tense conversation had turned into a trap. Marcus remained calm, his eyes scanning the street carefully. He counted at least 8 men besides Arnold. Some carried knives. Others held guns loosely at their sides. Arnold stretched his arms slightly like a man preparing for a performance. "See, Marcus," he said smoothly. "I expected you might try something heroic." His smile returned slowly. "So I prepared." Marcus didn't respond immediately. His attention shifted briefly toward the car where Mary and Martha sat. For a split second, his eyes met Martha's through the rain-covered window. The look was sharp and clear. "Stay inside. Don't move." Martha nodded slightly, though she wasn't sure he could see it. Arnold noticed the exchange and laughed softly. "Protective already," he teased. "That's adorable." He took another step forward, his shoes splashing lightly through the rainwater. "Let's stop wasting time. Hand the girl over." Marcus's voice was quiet but firm. No." Arnold sighed dramatically, as if disappointed by a stubborn child. "Then we'll take her." At that moment, one of Arnold's men suddenly moved toward the car. Marcus stepped forward instantly, blocking his path. The man froze when Marcus's cold eyes locked onto him. The air felt charged with tension, like a lightning strike waiting to happen. Arnold tilted his head slightly, watching the moment with interest. "You really think you can stop all of us?" he asked calmly. Marcus didn't answer with words. Instead, he moved. The speed surprised everyone. One moment he stood still. The next, his fist slammed into the nearest bodyguard's jaw with brutal force. The man collapsed instantly onto the wet pavement. Chaos exploded across the street. Arnold's men rushed forward while Marcus moved like a storm among them. Inside the car, Martha gasped while Mary covered her mouth in fear. Marcus fought with precise efficiency, every movement sharp and controlled. But even the strongest fighter could be overwhelmed by numbers. While the fight erupted in the rain, something else happened in the shadows. A second group of Arnold's men quietly approached from the opposite side of the warehouse. They had been waiting for the exact moment Marcus became distracted. One of them reached the passenger door of the car. Martha saw the dark figure through the rain-streaked window just before the door suddenly flew open. She screamed as a rough hand grabbed her arm. "Got her!" the man shouted. Mary tried pulling her back, but another man yanked the door wider and dragged Martha out into the rain. "Let go of me!" Martha cried, struggling wildly. Her bag fell onto the wet pavement as she kicked and twisted, but the men were stronger. Mary rushed out of the car behind them, grabbing Martha's sleeve. "Stop, please!" she begged. One of the men shoved her aside roughly. Mary stumbled and fell hard against the ground. Her cry of pain echoed across the street. Marcus heard it instantly. He turned just in time to see 2 men dragging Martha toward the waiting SUV. Rage flashed across his face like wildfire. He threw another attacker aside and sprinted toward them, but more men jumped into his path, forcing him to fight again. Arnold watched the entire scene with quiet amusement. "Efficient, isn't it?" he said calmly. Martha fought desperately as the men forced her toward the SUV. Rain soaked her hair and clothes while she struggled to break free. "Marcus!" she shouted without thinking. The sound of her voice cut through the chaos like a blade. Marcus knocked another man to the ground and pushed forward again, but someone grabbed his arm from behind. Another swung a metal pipe toward his head. Marcus ducked, but the blow clipped his shoulder, slowing him down just enough. Arnold walked calmly toward the SUV while his men shoved Martha inside. She kicked the door repeatedly, trying to escape. "Let me out!" she cried. Arnold leaned down slightly, meeting her terrified eyes. His smile returned, slow and cruel. "You should have accepted my offer earlier," he said softly. "Now things will be much less pleasant." He closed the door with a solid thud. Marcus finally broke free from the men holding him and lunged forward, but the SUV engine roared to life. Tires spun against the wet pavement as the vehicle shot down the street. Marcus chased it for several steps before stopping. The taillights disappeared into the rainy darkness. Silence slowly returned to the warehouse road, broken only by the sound of falling rain. Mary crawled across the wet pavement toward Marcus, tears mixing with the rain on her face. "They took her," she whispered, her voice broken. Marcus stood completely still, staring down the empty road where the SUV had vanished. The men who had attacked him were already retreating into their cars, satisfied with their mission. Within seconds, the street was empty again. Mary grabbed Marcus's arm desperately. "Please, you have to save her." Marcus slowly turned his head toward her. Something in his eyes had changed. The calm control he usually carried was still there, but beneath it burned something darker, something dangerous. Arnold Pusswell had just crossed a line that could not be ignored. Marcus helped Mary stand up gently despite the storm inside him. "Go back to the car," he said quietly. Mary wiped her tears. "Marcus." He looked once more toward the dark road ahead. His voice dropped to a cold whisper. Arnold just made the worst mistake of his life. The iron gates of the Pusswell family villa closed with a heavy metallic groan behind the black SUV. Martha felt the sound deep in her chest like a door slamming on hope itself. Rain continued falling, washing the long stone driveway in silver streaks as the vehicle rolled slowly toward the enormous mansion ahead. The place looked less like a home and more like a fortress built for kings and criminals. Tall marble columns framed the entrance, and warm golden lights glowed from dozens of tall windows. Beautiful on the outside, terrifying on the inside. Martha's wrists hurt from how tightly one of Arnold's men held her arm as they dragged her out of the car. "Move," he grunted. She stumbled slightly but kept walking, forcing herself not to cry. Fear sat in her chest like a stone, but somewhere deeper inside another feeling was growing too. Anger. Arnold stepped out behind her, brushing rainwater from his expensive coat. He looked completely relaxed, as if he had just returned home from a pleasant evening walk. "Welcome to my home," he said lightly. Martha turned toward him with fire in her eyes. "Marcus is coming," she said firmly. Arnold paused for a moment. Then he laughed, not loud, just soft and amused. "Marcus Santiago is many things," he replied calmly, "but stupid is not one of them. He knows attacking my family's home would start a war." He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "And wars are bad for business." Martha didn't answer, but she held his gaze without fear. Arnold smiled again. "I like that look," he said. "It makes this more interesting." Inside the villa, everything looked grand and expensive. Marble floors stretched beneath crystal chandeliers that glowed like captured stars. Paintings of wealthy ancestors stared down from the walls, their proud expressions frozen in oil and gold frames. But none of the beauty made Martha feel safe. The men shoved her forward through a wide hallway and into a large living room filled with dark leather chairs and a massive fireplace. Arnold walked in behind her, pouring himself a drink from a nearby crystal bottle. "You know," he said casually while swirling the amber liquid in his glass, "your father made a very bad decision borrowing money from us." Martha clenched her fists. "My father was sick," she replied. Arnold shrugged. "Sickness doesn't cancel debt." He took a slow sip before setting the glass aside. "Still, I'm not completely heartless." His eyes drifted slowly over her again. "You're quite beautiful, Martha. I could be generous." The words made her stomach twist. "You're disgusting," she said quietly. Arnold chuckled softly. "Maybe," he admitted, "but I'm also powerful." He gestured toward the guards standing near the doors. "And power usually gets what it wants." Martha refused to look away from him. Fear tried creeping back into her chest, but she pushed it down. She remembered Marcus standing in the rain facing a dozen men without hesitation. That image gave her strength. "Marcus will come," she repeated. Back in the city, Marcus Santiago stood inside a dimly lit room of his own headquarters. The rain had stopped, but the storm inside him had only grown stronger. Mary sat on a chair nearby, her hands trembling as she watched Marcus move around the room. Several of his trusted men stood silently along the walls. Maps of the city were spread across a large wooden table. Marcus leaned over them, studying every street and building with intense focus. One of his men, a tall guard named Raphael, spoke carefully. "Boss, the Pusswell villa is heavily guarded." Marcus didn't look up. "How many?" "At least 20 men," Raphael replied. "Maybe more." Another man added quietly, Their family will treat an attack like a declaration of war." Marcus finally lifted his head. His eyes were calm, but there was steel behind them. "This isn't war," he said quietly. "This is a rescue." Mary looked at him with desperate hope. "Marcus, if this causes trouble for you—" He gently raised a hand, stopping her. "Mary," he said softly, "you took care of me when no one else did." He paused briefly. "Now it's my turn." His gaze returned to the map. The Pusswell villa sat on a hill outside the city center, surrounded by tall walls and security gates. Breaking in would not be simple, but Marcus had built his reputation by solving impossible problems. He straightened slowly and looked at his men. "Prepare the cars." Back at the villa, Arnold had grown bored with conversation. He waved one of his guards forward. "Hey, take her upstairs," he ordered casually. Martha instantly stepped back. "No!" The guard grabbed her arm anyway and began pulling her toward the grand staircase. Martha fought again, kicking and struggling with everything she had. "Let me go!" Arnold watched calmly from the sofa, clearly enjoying the scene. "Relax," he called lazily. "I'm not a monster. We'll start with dinner." His smile widened. "Then we'll see what happens next." Martha's heart pounded harder as the guard dragged her up the stairs toward a long hallway lined with closed doors. The mansion felt enormous and empty, its silence echoing around her like a warning. She knew exactly what Arnold intended, but she also knew something else. Marcus Santiago was not the kind of man who gave up easily. And outside the massive iron gates of the Pusswell villa, several black cars quietly turned off their headlights and rolled to a silent stop in the darkness. Marcus Santiago stepped out of the lead car, his eyes fixed on the towering mansion ahead. The night had grown strangely quiet around the Pusswell family villa. The rain clouds had drifted away, leaving the sky dark and heavy above the hill where the mansion stood like a king's castle. Tall iron gates guarded the entrance while security lights bathed the stone walls in pale white glow. But beyond those lights, hidden in the deep shadows of the surrounding trees, several black cars waited silently. Their engines were off, their headlights were dark. Inside one of those cars sat Marcus Santiago. His eyes studied the villa with the same calm focus a hunter used when watching prey from a distance. Beside him, Raphael adjusted the magazine of his pistol and looked toward the towering gates. "There are guards near the front entrance and cameras on the walls," he said quietly. Marcus nodded once. He had already noticed them. Then the Pusswell family was powerful and wealthy. Their home had been built to keep enemies out. But Marcus had learned something during his years rising through the Underworld. Every fortress had weaknesses. You just had to be patient enough to find them. He stepped out of the car slowly, the cool night air brushing against his coat. Behind him, 3 of his most trusted men stepped out as well. No one spoke loudly. No one moved carelessly. The mission was simple: get Martha out alive. Marcus looked toward the tall gate one last time before speaking. "We're not here for a war," he said calmly. "Only the girl." The men nodded in understanding. Inside the mansion, Martha sat alone in a large bedroom that looked more like a luxury hotel suite than a prison. The walls were painted soft cream colors. and elegant lamps cast warm golden light across the room. A huge bed stood near the window, covered in thick white blankets. A small table beside it held a tray of untouched food. Arnold had ordered dinner brought to her, but Martha hadn't touched a single bite. Her hands rested tightly in her lap as she stared at the closed door across the room. A guard stood outside. She could hear his slow footsteps pacing in the hallway. Every sound made her heart beat faster. Fear whispered in her mind constantly, reminding her how trapped she was. But she refused to break. She remembered the look in Marcus's eyes when Arnold's men dragged her away. That calm, dangerous promise. He would come. Martha walked toward the window and pushed the curtain aside slightly. Outside, the massive garden stretched beneath the moonlight. Tall hedges lined the paths like green walls, and statues stood quietly among the trees. Everything looked peaceful. Too peaceful. Martha sighed softly and let the curtain fall back into place. "Please come," she whispered under her breath, though she wasn't sure if she was praying or hoping. At that same moment, far below the window in the shadow of the garden wall, Marcus Santiago silently climbed over the stone barrier. Marcus landed lightly on the grass inside the villa's massive garden. His men followed seconds later, moving quickly and quietly. The tall hedges created natural cover as they advanced toward the mansion. From this angle, the guards near the front gate could not see them. Marcus crouched briefly, studying the back entrance of the house. One security guard stood beside a small door used by servants. But the man held a cigarette and looked half asleep, clearly bored by the quiet shift. Marcus signaled with 2 fingers. One of his men moved silently through the shadows behind the hedge line. Within seconds, the guard felt a sudden hand cover his mouth while another arm locked around his neck. The cigarette dropped to the grass as the man lost consciousness without making a sound. Marcus approached and gently lowered the guard to the ground. "No unnecessary violence," he whispered. His men nodded. They pushed open the servant door and slipped inside the mansion. The hallway beyond was empty, lit only by soft wall lamps. Marcus could hear distant voices somewhere deeper inside the house. Arnold's men, probably drinking, laughing, celebrating their capture. Marcus moved forward carefully, his footsteps silent against the polished floor. Each corner he turned was slow and deliberate. Each door he passed was checked with sharp attention. Somewhere above them in the upper floors of the mansion, Martha was waiting. Meanwhile, in the grand living room downstairs, Arnold Pusswell sat comfortably on a leather sofa with a drink in his hand. Several of his men relaxed around the room, talking and laughing loudly. Arnold seemed perfectly calm, though a small part of him remained curious. "I expected Santiago to try something," he said casually, while swirling the liquid in his glass. One of his guards shrugged. "Boss, even he isn't crazy enough to storm this place." Arnold smiled faintly. "Maybe." He leaned back deeper into the sofa. "But sometimes men surprise you when they care about something." Upstairs, the guard outside Martha's room suddenly heard something strange. A faint sound from the staircase at the end of the hallway. He turned his head slightly, squinting down the corridor. "Hello?" he called quietly. The hallway remained silent. He took a few cautious steps forward. At that exact moment, a hand grabbed his collar from behind and slammed him quietly against the wall. Before he could shout, Marcus's forearm pressed against his throat. "Where is she?" Marcus whispered coldly. The guard's eyes widened in shock. "Room! 3rd door!" he choked out. Marcus released him instantly, and the man collapsed unconscious onto the floor. Marcus turned toward the hallway. 3 doors stood along the wall. The 3rd one was slightly different from the others. A faint light glowed beneath it. Marcus stepped closer and slowly opened the door. Inside the room, Martha turned quickly when she heard the handle move. Fear flashed across her face for a split second. Then she saw who stood in the doorway. Marcus Santiago. Her breath caught in her throat. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Marcus looked at her carefully, making sure she was unharmed. "Can you walk?" he asked quietly. Martha nodded quickly. Relief flooded her chest so strongly she nearly cried. Yes. Marcus stepped inside the room and gestured toward the hallway. Then we leave now. Martha grabbed her bag and hurried toward the door, but just as they stepped into the hallway together, a slow clapping sound echoed from the staircase. Marcus turned his head sharply. Arnold Pusswell stood at the top of the stairs with several armed men behind him, a cruel smile spreading across his face. The slow clap echoed through the hallway like a mocking drumbeat. Marcus Santiago stopped walking the moment he heard it. Martha stood slightly behind him, her breath quick and uneven as she looked toward the staircase. Arnold Pusswell leaned casually against the railing at the top of the stairs, his smile wide and amused, as if he had just discovered something entertaining rather than dangerous. Several armed men stood behind him, their weapons pointed down the hallway. The warm golden lights of the mansion reflected against the polished marble floor, making the entire moment feel strangely calm despite the danger hanging in the air. Arnold tilted his head slightly while studying Marcus. "You know," he said lazily, "I actually hoped you would come." Marcus didn't respond immediately. His eyes moved carefully across the hallway, measuring distance, counting enemies, calculating escape paths. Martha could feel the tension in his shoulders, like a coiled spring ready to snap. Arnold chuckled softly. "You really walked straight into my home for a bartender's daughter," he continued. "That's either very brave or very stupid." Marcus's voice was calm when he finally spoke. "Move." The single word echoed through the hallway. Arnold raised an eyebrow in amusement. "You're giving orders inside my house?" he asked. "That's bold." Martha's fingers gripped her bag tightly. She could sense that everything balanced on a thin edge now. One wrong move could turn the hallway into a battlefield. Arnold slowly stepped down the staircase, his polished shoes clicking softly against the marble steps. Each step felt deliberate, like a predator enjoying the moment before the kill. "You see, Marcus," he said casually, I've heard stories about you for years." He reached the bottom step and stopped only a few feet away from them. The quiet king of the city, the man who built his empire with discipline. His eyes flickered toward Martha briefly. "But I never imagined you were the romantic type." Marcus didn't react to the insult. His focus remained steady. "Let her go," he said quietly. Arnold laughed. "You're still negotiating?" He turned slightly toward his guards. He really believes he can leave here with her. The men chuckled under their breath. Martha felt fear creeping back into her chest, but she forced herself to stand still behind Marcus. Arnold took another step closer. "Tell you what," he said thoughtfully. "Leave now, Marcus. Walk out of this house and forget the girl. I'll even pretend this little break-in never happened." Marcus's eyes hardened slightly. "No." The answer came without hesitation. Arnold sighed dramatically. "I was afraid you'd say that." He lifted his hand slowly. Behind him, the guards raised their weapons higher. Everything exploded in motion at once. Marcus moved faster than anyone expected. He grabbed Martha's arm and shoved her toward the hallway behind him. "Run!" he ordered. At the same moment, gunshots cracked through the mansion like thunder. Marcus dove behind a marble pillar while bullets shattered pieces of the wall around them. Martha sprinted down the hallway, her heart pounding wildly. Behind her, Marcus's men suddenly appeared from the staircase corridor, returning fire toward Arnold's guards. The mansion that had seemed peaceful moments ago now echoed with chaos and shouting. Arnold stepped backward calmly while his men engaged the attackers. He watched Marcus carefully with narrowed eyes. "So you brought friends," he murmured. Meanwhile, Marcus pushed forward through the hallway despite the gunfire, forcing Arnold's men to retreat step by step, the air filled with the sharp smell of gunpowder. Martha reached the end of the corridor and turned toward the staircase leading downstairs. She could hear Marcus fighting behind her, the sounds of struggle echoing across the marble walls. Just as she reached the bottom of the stairs, a sudden figure appeared in front of her. Arnold Pusswell. Somehow he had circled around through another hallway. His smile returned the moment he saw her freeze in place. "Running already?" he asked softly. Martha turned quickly, but two of Arnold's men appeared behind her, blocking the exit. Fear surged through her chest again. Arnold approached slowly, clearly enjoying the moment. "You really thought you were leaving that easily?" he said. Martha's eyes darted around desperately. Somewhere upstairs, Marcus was still fighting his way through the guards, but Arnold stood directly between her and the exit. "Your hero won't reach you in time," Arnold whispered. He reached forward and grabbed her wrist roughly. "Now let's finish what we started." Martha struggled against him, but Arnold's grip tightened. At that moment, Marcus burst into the stairway hallway above them. His eyes instantly locked onto the scene below. Arnold holding Martha. Rage ignited across Marcus's face. Without thinking, he charged down the staircase 2 steps at a time. Arnold saw him coming and reacted instantly. With his free hand, he pulled a small knife from his jacket. The blade flashed under the chandelier light. "Stay back!" he shouted. Marcus didn't slow down. Arnold grabbed Martha and pulled her slightly in front of him as a shield. "I said stop!" The blade pressed dangerously close to her throat. Marcus froze halfway down the stairs, his chest rising with controlled anger. For a long moment, silence returned to the room, except for the distant sounds of fighting upstairs. Arnold's smile returned slowly. "Now this feels more balanced," he said. But he made one mistake. In that moment of confidence, he loosened his grip just enough. Martha reacted without hesitation. She stomped hard on his foot and twisted away. Arnold cursed and grabbed for her again. Marcus lunged forward at the same time. The two men collided violently near the base of the staircase. The knife flashed again as Arnold drove the blade forward. Marcus gasped sharply as the knife sank into his side, and before Arnold could pull the weapon back, Martha grabbed a fallen gun from the floor and pointed it straight at him with shaking hands. The moment stretched like frozen time inside the grand hall of the villa. Marcus Santiago dropped to one knee as pain exploded through his side where Arnold's knife had struck. The polished marble floor beneath him slowly darkened as blood spread across his shirt. Martha stood a few feet away, her hands trembling violently as she held the fallen gun she had grabbed from the floor. She had never held a weapon before in her life. The cold metal felt heavy and unfamiliar in her shaking grip. Arnold Pusswell stepped back slightly after the stab, breathing harder than before. For the first time since this nightmare began, the cruel confidence on his face cracked. He hadn't expected Marcus to rush him so recklessly, and he definitely hadn't expected Martha to be standing there with a gun pointed straight at his chest. The mansion had fallen strangely silent again. Even the distant gunfire upstairs had stopped. Arnold slowly raised his hands, though the mocking smile still lingered on his lips. "Careful," he said smoothly. "Those things are dangerous." Martha's heart pounded so hard she could hear it in her ears. The gun wavered slightly as she aimed it. Her eyes flickered briefly toward Marcus. He was still on one knee, gripping his side tightly. Blood seeped through his fingers. Fear stabbed through her chest at the sight. "Marcus," she whispered. But Marcus lifted his head and looked directly at her, his voice firm despite the pain. "Don't hesitate." Arnold chuckled softly at the scene unfolding before him. "Listen to him," he said. "The great Marcus Santiago asking a bartender's daughter to pull the trigger." He tilted his head slightly, studying her trembling hands. "Do you even know how to use that?" Martha swallowed hard. She had never heard anyone before, never even imagined something like this happening. Her entire life had been quiet, school, work, helping her mother. Now she stood inside a mansion filled with criminals, holding a weapon that could end a life. Arnold took a slow step forward, clearly testing her courage. "Go ahead," he teased softly. "Shoot me." Martha's arms shook harder. "Stop moving!" she shouted. Arnold only smiled wider. "Or what?" he replied calmly. Behind her, Marcus forced himself to stand slowly despite the stabbing pain burning through his body. His voice came out lower now, edged with warning. Arnold, don't. Arnold glanced toward him with amusement. Relax, he said. I'm just curious how brave she really is. He turned his eyes back to Martha. Because I see fear all over you. The words cut deep. Martha felt her chest tighten as doubt crept into her thoughts. Could she really do it? Arnold took another step forward. You know something funny? He continued casually. People like you always believe heroes will save them. His eyes flickered toward Marcus again. But heroes bleed too. Marcus staggered slightly, struggling to remain standing. The knife wound burned like fire with every breath. Arnold noticed the weakness and grinned. See, he said. He's dying already. The words snapped something inside Martha. Her fear suddenly twisted into something else. Anger. She remembered the moment Marcus had stood in the rain fighting off Arnold's men to protect her, and the moment he charged down the stairs without hesitation, the moment he had taken that knife instead of letting Arnold hurt her again. Her grip on the gun slowly steadied. Arnold noticed the change immediately. His smile faded just a little. Careful now, he said more cautiously. Martha's voice came out quiet but firm. You're not touching him again. Arnold laughed once more, though the sound carried less confidence now. And what are you going to do about it? He asked. Shoot me? Martha looked straight into his eyes. Yes, she said. Arnold's expression hardened as he suddenly lunged forward. The movement was quick and desperate. He was hoping to knock the gun aside before she could react. But this time, Martha didn't freeze. Her finger tightened on the trigger. The gunshot exploded through the grand hall like thunder. Arnold's body jerked violently as the bullet struck his chest. For a moment he stood there frozen, shock spreading across his face. Then the cruel smile finally disappeared. His knees buckled beneath him. Arnold Pusswell collapsed onto the marble floor with a dull thud. Silence swallowed the room again. The gun slipped from Martha's hands and clattered against the floor as she stared down at him in disbelief. She had done it. Arnold lay motionless, blood slowly spreading across the polished marble beneath his body. Martha's breathing came in sharp bursts as the reality hit her. Marcus stepped forward carefully, one hand still pressing against his wound. He looked down at Arnold for a moment before lifting his eyes toward Martha. There was no fear in his expression, only calm understanding. You saved my life, he said quietly. Martha rushed toward him immediately, tears finally breaking free from her eyes. You're bleeding, she said desperately, grabbing his arm to support him. Marcus winced slightly but managed a faint smile. I've survived worse. At that moment, footsteps thundered down the staircase as Marcus's men rushed into the hall. Raphael stopped abruptly when he saw Arnold's body on the floor. Boss? Marcus nodded once. It's over. Raphael glanced between them, clearly impressed. The Pusswell guards are down or running, he reported. We should leave before more arrive. Marcus agreed. He wrapped an arm lightly around Martha's shoulders to steady himself as they moved toward the exit together. Outside, the night air felt cold and fresh after the chaos inside the mansion. Several of Marcus's cars waited near the gates, engines already running. As they helped Marcus into the back seat, Martha finally looked at him again with worried eyes. You're going to be okay, right? She asked quietly. Marcus leaned back against the seat, his breathing steady despite the pain. For a moment he studied her face. The girl he once avoided meeting had just changed everything. Yes, he said softly. The city was still asleep when Marcus Santiago's convoy of black cars sped quietly through the empty streets. The night's chaos at the Pusswell villa was already fading behind them like a bad dream, but inside the car the tension had not disappeared. Marcus sat in the back seat, leaning slightly against the door as Raphael pressed thick bandages against the wound in his side. Blood had soaked through Marcus's shirt, but the bleeding had slowed. Across from him, Martha sat silently with her hands clasped together in her lap. The events of the night still felt unreal. Only hours ago she had been a normal girl worried about a debt her father left behind. Now she had stood inside a Mafia villa, held a gun, and watched a powerful man fall to the floor. Her mind replayed the moment again and again. The sound of the gunshot, Arnold's shocked face, the way Marcus had looked at her afterward, not with fear or blame, but with calm respect. The car finally pulled into the private driveway of Marcus's mansion on the quiet edge of the city. Large gates opened smoothly, revealing a modern villa surrounded by tall trees and silent security guards. As the car stopped, 2 medical staff rushed forward with equipment. Marcus was helped out carefully and guided inside. Martha followed closely behind, to her heart pounding with worry. She didn't realize until that moment how much the thought of losing him frightened her. Inside the mansion, Marcus was placed on a large leather couch while the doctor quickly examined the knife wound. Mary rushed into the room moments later after hearing the cars arrive. The moment she saw Martha standing there alive, tears flooded her eyes. "Martha!" she cried, running forward and wrapping her daughter in a tight embrace. Martha hugged her back just as fiercely. "I thought I lost you," Mary whispered. Martha shook her head gently. "Marcus came for me." Mary turned her tearful eyes toward Marcus, who sat quietly while the doctor finished stitching the wound. Gratitude filled her expression so deeply she could barely speak. Marcus gave her a small, reassuring nod. "She's safe," he said simply. The doctor finished wrapping the bandages and stepped back. "You were lucky," he said. "Another inch deeper and this would be a different conversation." Marcus gave a faint smile. "Luck has never liked me much." The doctor left with the medical team, leaving the room quiet again. Mary sat beside her daughter, while Marcus leaned back against the couch, clearly exhausted. The adrenaline of the night was finally fading, and the pain was beginning to settle in. But despite everything, a strange sense of calm filled the room. Morning sunlight slowly crept through the tall windows as the city outside began to wake. For the first time in days, Martha felt the heavy fear lifting from her chest. Arnold Pusswell was gone. The nightmare that had chased them for so long had ended. She walked toward the large window and looked out at the peaceful garden beyond the glass. Birds moved quietly between the trees, and the early sunlight painted the sky soft shades of gold. For the first time since the trouble began, the world looked normal again. Behind her, Marcus slowly stood up from the couch despite Mary's worried protests. "You should rest," Mary insisted gently. Marcus shook his head. "I've rested enough for one night." He walked carefully toward the window where Martha stood. For a moment they simply stood there, side by side in silence. Finally Marcus spoke. "You were brave tonight." Martha looked down slightly. "I was terrified." Marcus gave a quiet nod. "Bravery usually looks like that." She turned toward him slowly. "I didn't know if I could pull the trigger." Marcus studied her face calmly. "But you did." Martha's voice softened. "Only because you were about to die." Marcus didn't respond immediately. Instead, he looked out at the sunlight stretching across the garden. "People spend years wondering what they're capable of," he said quietly. "Sometimes life answers that question in one moment." Mary watched them from across the room with a thoughtful expression. For years she had known Marcus as the quiet, guarded boy who had grown into a powerful but lonely man. She had always hoped one day he might find someone who could reach the part of him he kept hidden from the world. Now she could see something subtle changing in his eyes when he looked at Martha. Something warmer. Martha finally spoke again, her voice curious. "What happens now?" Marcus turned slightly toward her. "Now, Arnold's death will cause noise in the underworld for a while," he admitted. "But the Pusswell family knows he created his own problems." He paused before adding calmly, "They won't touch you again." Martha felt a wave of relief wash through her chest. The fear that had haunted her for days finally loosened its grip. Mary stood and walked over to them, placing a gentle hand on Marcus's arm. "You've already done more than enough," she said warmly. Marcus shook his head slightly. "No." He looked at Martha again, his voice softer now. This was never about debt. It was about protecting family. The word lingered quietly in the air. For a long moment, none of them spoke. The sunlight continued filling the room while the world outside moved forward like any other morning. But something inside Marcus Santiago had shifted in a way he hadn't expected. For years he had kept people at a distance, convinced that caring for someone only led to betrayal and pain. Yet tonight he had walked straight into danger for a girl he had only just met. And somehow, instead of regret, he felt something else growing quietly in his chest, something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Martha looked at him with a small smile. "Thank you," she said softly. Marcus nodded once, his calm expression returning, but his eyes held a new warmth that hadn't been there before. Sometimes one small moment changes the direction of an entire life. And on a rainy night when a frightened mother asked a powerful man to escort her daughter just for one day, Marcus Santiago's life had changed forever. And sometimes the strongest people are the ones who choose to protect others when they don't have to. Marcus Santiago walked into danger expecting nothing in return, but in doing so, he discovered something he thought he had lost forever, the ability to care again. And Martha discovered that courage doesn't mean being fearless. It means standing up even when fear is shaking your hands. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment telling me where you're watching from in the world. I love seeing how far these stories travel and reading your thoughts. And remember, sometimes one small request can change a life forever.